Hey everyone, it's Lisa with Are You My Cousin? Here to have our weekly Facebook/YouTube live chat so that we can talk all things genealogy. I do like to come each week because you guys know I love to talk about genealogy, right? So if you are just joining me, welcome, welcome. I'm glad that you are here, and I truly appreciate you guys showing up week after week. It really makes me feel good to know that you find value in what we chat about. If you are new to the Are You My Cousin YouTube channel, or just for the first time getting to join in on one of the live chats, thank you so much for showing up. Feel free to put comments in the comment section. I do see those as we talk, and I try to get to as many questions and comments as I possibly can. So feel free to do that. We are casual. I want to have a conversation with you guys, so that's wonderful. Hey, Brianna. Hey, oh, we've got M. Daniely from Oxon Hill, Maryland. Wonderful. Hey, Eric, good to see you from New York. Wonderful. For those of you who may not know me, I am sitting in my office in North Carolina, my home office. So, hey, Dave, good to see you again from Washington. Hey, Susan from Oregon as well. So we are literally across the continent, or the U.S. today. And Deb's back from Colorado. Wonderful. Yay. Janice from Pennsylvania. I was just looking at some records from Pennsylvania. Oh, hey, Hazel from Albuquerque, and Bill from Long Island. Oh, wow, we are just all over the place. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I am so glad you are here. Now, if you are watching on YouTube, if you want to know when I go live each week, be sure and hit that subscribe button. It should be down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and that lets you be notified that when I'm going live or when I post a new video on the YouTube channel. If you're on Facebook and you want to give it a thumbs up, that's great too, because that lets the Facebook algorithm know that you're interested in hearing more about genealogy talks and when we go live. So love to have you guys do that. So Catherine said, are my Thursday chats going to stay at the same time? Oh, the email said otherwise. Oh, yes, they're going to stay at the same time. I'll have to check that email. I must have had an error there. So I do keep them at 3 o'clock on Thursday, 3 o'clock Eastern time on Thursday afternoons. Occasionally I'll have to switch one around if something's going on, but yes, they will. I did do one every now and then, guys. I do have an impromptu Facebook Live or YouTube Live, and those are really just not scheduled. Those are just whenever I drop in. If I have something really exciting to tell you or to share with you. I did do one yesterday over on the My Heritage page, so that may have, I hope that didn't cause any confusion. So that was a different day, but that was actually on the My Heritage page. So if you have an interest in cemetery research, you might want to check that out later. Just go over to the video section on the My Heritage page, and you'll see the Facebook Live I did with them yesterday. We had a lot of fun with that. So thank you, Catherine, for bringing that up. I will double check and make sure I am good to go on that. So, wow. Hey, Pam from Canada. We have folks, Vicky's from snowy Fort Wayne, Indiana. I know we've been watching that snowstorm kind of getting ready to go. Yes, Catherine, in the Memphis area, we've been watching that ice storm. I think we're going to actually miss it in North Carolina. It's going to everything's kind of going north and west of us. And actually, guys, I probably shouldn't tell you, but it's about 70 degrees outside right now. Which is unusual for us. All right, back to genealogy, guys. We are here. So we are talking about, I've been really focused on marriage records lately. I've been doing some client work going around marriage records. I've been studying those quite intensely. I've got a masterclass coming up next week. So if it's something that you think that you struggle with and want to kind of learn what all goes into my search when it comes to looking for a marriage record, love to have you join me for that. There is a small charge for that one. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the comments so you guys can check that out later. It is the thing with marriage records is that we're never guaranteed that we're going to find that we're going to find our ancestors' marriage record. We can search, and we want to make sure that we are doing an exhaustive search, and that's always my goal. So my goal is, well, ultimately my goal is to, and my hope is to find that marriage record for an ancestor, but my goal is that I do an exhaustive search, so that in lieu of, if I can't find it, just to know that I have done an exhaustive search is just as important to me as a researcher as to be able to actually find it, because the reality is not every marriage record can be found. And that's unfortunate, but it does, but it happens. And I think we all know that if you've been researching for any length of time, that can definitely rear its ugly head when we can't find our records. So I thought it would be interesting today to have a talk about why we might be missing or why we might not be finding that marriage record in court records and in church records, et cetera. So I did do just an impromptu Facebook Live on Monday, and we talked about not finding records because a county was burned or known as a burned county. So you may research in areas where there was a large destruction or a major destruction of records at the county courthouse. It could be, we typically call them burned counties because usually it was fire that would cause a lot of damage, but it could be anything. It could be, hurricanes and tornadoes or floods or really anything. So, but we tend to call them as a burned county. So that was one reason you may not find it, and you may miss it because sometimes not all the records were completely destroyed. Sometimes there are fragments that are left, may not be much, but if it's your ancestor in that little fragment, that's all you need, right? So I would what I encourage people to do was to seek out revisit those counties where records may have been destroyed, or and make sure that there wasn't a fragment that there was still left to be found. So you definitely don't want to miss something that's there just because we assume that the courthouse records were destroyed. All right, so there's some other things to think about when it comes to finding those marriage records that I think are really interesting, and that is really as far as burned counties are concerned, but sometimes the records just flat out did not survive. And if they're not there, they're not there, and we're out of luck. So in other words, when I think about that, I do a lot of research, as you guys know, in North Carolina. I look at marriage bonds a lot. And I have this I'm like, I want to find that marriage bond. Then I'm like, it doesn't quite give me enough information, or rats, I can't find that one. Well, the reality is, I looked up this stat that prior to 1868 here in North Carolina, probably only about 20% of the county marriage records actually survived. That's not a lot of records. So when I don't find it in a marriage bond, I don't find a marriage bond for my ancestors, then I don't assume that I'm missing some. I know that such a large number didn't actually survive. So that is something to take into account when you're researching. If you are struggling finding records in a certain county, take a step back and do a little bit of research on the records collection to determine how much of it actually did survive, how much of it actually made it all the way to the archives, because you may be missing, it may be missing significant parts that you're not aware of. There could be gaps within that record collection. And that's another thing to really think about, is making sure you understand what the marriage record collections consist of, and if there was anything missing for certain years, maybe for whatever reason. Not everybody who took the clerk's job did exactly what they were supposed to do or followed things the same way. So we need to make sure that we're not missing because of that type of reasoning. Another one to think about would be, sometimes think about in terms of ancestors who may have been living more in a common law type of marriage. In other words, they basically were not legally married, but they were in a long-term committed relationship. They functioned like a married couple. They had children. They might, the common law wife might even be referred to with the husband's surname. I've seen that back and forth. And this can actually happen for a number of reasons. Now, one thing that's important is that depending on where you're researching, common law marriages, as we refer to those long-term commitments, were not necessarily legally recognized in that state. So for instance, if I'm researching my ancestors in North Carolina who didn't actually get married, but weren't legally married, but were in that long-term relationship. And guys, I'm not talking just modern times, and we're talking back into the 1800s. Well, common law marriages are not legally recognized. So therefore, there would be nothing of legal record for that particular union. So that is something to think about. Now, why could this have happened? This could happen for a number of reasons. So early on in, say, colonial times and early North Carolina history or early state histories, getting married could be kind of expensive. And so, or they needed to have banns read. So where the clergy would read the banns for 3 consecutive Sundays in the church to make sure there was no reason that the couple shouldn't get married before they got married. Well, there's a problem there. If you are living in a very rural part of a state that didn't have any clergy or any official to actually read those bans, sometimes they would just notify the family and friends, and then they would just kind of be married on their own. So there was no legal document for it, but that was kind of how they took care of it, because there was nothing close by for them to do that with. So that could actually, we'll see that sometimes happen as well. It's an interesting dynamic, but it's kind of, it's odd, but it does happen. So that was kind of an interesting thing. June said in the Catholic Church, they didn't recognize civil marriage as a marriage. Exactly. And that brings up a good point, is really understanding your ancestors' faith as well. So if somebody was Catholic or Church of England coming over and they were not living where there was clergy or a church close to them, they could get married in a civil or a common law type of marriage but the church would never recognize it. So you have that piece of the puzzle going as well. It makes it harder, and all you can do in the long run is really kind of understand what is happening and what the culture was like for your ancestor at that point in time and in that location. So if you are struggling to find a marriage for an ancestor in colonial Virginia, then research colonial Virginia marriage records and read about and learn about what type of records there may have been and what were the problems with those records to search. So again, it goes back to really understanding the records that were created for that period of time and for that place, time and place, and the reason behind the records. All right, so another reason that we might have issues finding a record, actually, and this would probably apply more to some of our Southern researchers out there, would be the Reconstruction period in the South. And to be honest, some of the governments and some of the things were just in shambles right after during the Civil War and right after. And so you may find things just were destroyed or misfiled or just simply didn't ever get recorded correctly. So we do see that in areas of upheaval, definitely. I'm more familiar with those Southern ones Southern reasons as opposed to other parts of the U.S. based on, because that's just where I research, but that absolutely happens. Let's see, Vicki was saying if someone left a marriage without a divorce, they may have said they were widowed, but wouldn't legally marry because there was a spouse in another location. Absolutely. Vicki, you're absolutely right. So they could walk away from a marriage, man or woman, and they may, get married, but not really legally married to somebody else because they still had a spouse. And that actually definitely could happen. And it did happen, definitely. So there's those kinds of things to think about. One of the things that we'll talk a lot about in our masterclass is really what was happening in your ancestors' world. What was going on? Why would they have walked away like that? Why would they not have sought that divorce? For females, they may not have sought the divorce because it was just so difficult to get, or it may have been expensive. So they just walked away from that life to another life. So we have to think about those reasons that are behind it, definitely. Catherine was saying that you thought your ancestors lived in one Tennessee county, since that's where their marriage records are, and you found out they lived in the next county, but closer to that county's courthouse. Absolutely. Our ancestors did not necessarily get married in the county where they lived. Depends on where that courthouse was. Were they closer to the neighboring county's courthouse? They might have done that. Was it depending on time of year? Did they go to a different courthouse because they didn't have to cross the river that was swollen with rain, the spring rains or the spring thaw from the mountains? Those kinds of things impacted our ancestors, and we have to think about their life at that level to be able to understand where their records might be. Definitely, I think about that, Catherine, a lot. And I was just writing that section for the masterclass and thinking about all the things that kind of impact our ancestors. And it comes down to really understanding what their life was like and where they might have gone, why they might have gotten married, why they might have not had a legal marriage. Maybe they didn't have a legal marriage because as a female, could she possibly stand on her own? Was she at a certain point in her life, was she a widow, somebody who could be a femme sole and act on her own accord? Well, if she got married, she lost that ability again. And maybe she didn't want that. Maybe she wanted to maintain her own rights. And so what few she had as a woman, but that could be part of the reason someone did not actually marry. So we need to kind of think about that as well. And then I heard this really odd story from a reader who left a comment on one of the blogs a few years back. And I thought, I've never forgotten this because I think it really kind of speaks to people are human, and people, the county clerks were human, the justices of peace, we were all human and make mistakes. And so consider when you have things like a justice of a peace. Maybe somebody went and got married at a justice of the peace, okay? And years later, that descendant is looking for that marriage record. Could not find it in the county, and had a lot of had a lot of clues that it was in a particular county. So this researcher did a very smart thing. They reached out to the local historian or to the courthouse themselves and said, what is going on? Why can I not find this marriage record? Because, we have evidence that this is where they were married. And it came back that that particular justice of the peace didn't do a really good job. He would marry people, but then he would never turn in his register to the county clerk's office. So he never put the records or his list of marriages to the courthouse. And then he eventually just ran off. And so this is a very unique situation for that particular county, but it brings up the fact that if we're really sure a record is somewhere and we're not seeing it, reach out to the county government, I'd probably reach out to historians, the county historian, or, the local genealogists who research there to see if there's some idiosyncratic nuance there that we're missing that's very unique to that particular county. I would never have thought about a justice of the peace just not turning in the records and then leaving town. I can't say I would have thought of that on my own. So look into that county and see what's unique. Maybe that happened, or maybe they, maybe they filed it differently for a certain time period. So I would encourage you to reach out and ask, because you'd hate to miss it just because of that. So yeah. June said topographical maps help when you're trying to figure out the closest town to get married or church. Yes, definitely. And look for traveling minister records on the Northeast. That's a really good idea. So topographical maps, those are maps that show the terrain, which I like to use. And you can actually some sites will let you overlay them on regular maps. And it gives you an idea of like where the rivers are, where the towns are located, what kind of terrain is between, say, the town or the area where your ancestor lived and the courthouse. Maybe it's really rugged, or maybe it's really flat and easy and they can just go, kind of thing. So those are really good maps to look at. I like those a lot. The other thing, she talked about the traveling minister records on the Northeast. Jane, I'm going to have to look those up. I have not used the traveling minister records at the Northeast. Now, I have kind of delved into some of the circuit riders here with the Methodist Church in North Carolina. And, those records are hard to find because they didn't always survive, because they took them from church to church each time, right? So those tend not to be as prevalent in our area, but I'm going to look those up. And if you want to let me know, or I'm assuming, are you thinking Methodist ministers for that? Or are you thinking just the general traveling minister? Because I'd love to look that up and see a little bit more about that. So yeah. Michael has a great grandmother who's listed as a widow, no trace of a husband. Absolutely. That, it could be that she didn't, Michael, that she didn't have, maybe she did have a husband, maybe she didn't. Maybe she didn't have a husband, but it was viewed better to be a widow than perhaps, say, a single old maid, perhaps, depending on what her situation was. As a widow, I don't know if just saying you're a widow would have given her a few more rights when it came to handling her own property, as opposed to being able to prove she was the widow. I'd have to look at that a little closer, but that's certainly a possibility. Oh, June, you meant the traveling minister's journals. You found a few. That's really great. Yes, I have found a few. I'm actually fortunate. When I was diving into this a little bit, one of my ancestors who has an incredibly common name of Smith actually was a prominent minister. He rose up through the ranks of Methodist ministers, so we are able to see his. But yeah, but perfectly, you've got to check and see who's there. Families, and she said family letters are another source when someone was married. Definitely that family source. The family sources are great. And Catherine's Presbyterian great-grandfather was a circuit rider in Arkansas. That's right. I had forgotten about that. So yes, circuit riders, ministers, they were quite prevalent, and not just in the Methodist Church, but obviously in the Presbyterian Church as well. And so some of their journals have made it to some of the denominational archives, or maybe a local county history museum or city museum. You can check those types of things for those. They're a little harder to find. I would probably check Archive Grid. If you guys are not familiar with Archive Grid, go to my website, and on the search bar on that first page, type in Archive Grid, and it will tell you how to use Archive Grid to search special collections for things like those ministers' records, ministers' journals, and the circuit riders. That's a great way to find journals like that in special collections. That's the tool that I use every time I need to search special collections around the world. Excellent. So that's an excellent source to use. So yes, so there's lots of reasons why we might not find some, and again, certainly reasons that it gives us some ideas of where to think. June, I think you mean Percy on that. I think you maybe meant Percy on that. Yes, Percy's an excellent place to find those journals too. I use that. It's over on Find My Past. I look up marriage records and ministers' journals there as well. So that's a good place to look. So yes, we have to consider lots of different places and really understanding what our ancestors' world looked like. And I think sometimes that what our ancestors' world looked like, I think that's at the heart of a lot of our research. And I think it's at the heart of a lot of why we get stuck sometimes in research, is we have to consider what their world was like. What did they see when they looked out the window? What did that ancestor see? They saw a raging river out there, or the creeks were swollen, they couldn't cross them safely. So, okay, I'm going to turn and look the other way. What's easier? What were they looking at in the world? What was happening in the community? What were their rights? What was going to happen to them as a woman? What would happen if she married or chose not to marry that particular person, and just to have a long-term relationship? Those are all types of things to think about when it comes to your research. Okay. Oh, okay. Catherine said Percy's now back at Allen County Genealogy Center. Perfect. That's a great place to look. So that's good to know. I did not realize that. Absolutely. So, and June's found town marriages in town records for plantations of Maine. Absolutely. Absolutely. So those town records are wonderful places to look as well. So there are lots of little places. When you're not able to find your ancestors' record, just because you don't find them in that county record or that state record, the marriage bond or the license, there are other places to look. As you can see, we've got lots of kind of little odds and ends places to look, as I like to call them. They don't have to be always at that county courthouse. So it's helpful when they are, definitely, but there are other ways to go about finding them. We cover a lot. I'll be covering a lot of those in my masterclass next week on finding those marriage records and the marriage dates to be able to hopefully get that marriage, those ancestral lines a little more tied up and get some more dates on that tree for us to be able to really find those ancestors. So yeah, that's what I really wanted to kind of share with you guys, was to kind of get you thinking about why we're not finding our ancestors, so that we can then kind of turn that around and think, okay, if that's why I'm not finding them, so how can we overcome that particular issue? How can we overcome the issue that for whatever reason I'm not finding that, they got married by the justice of the peace, but I'm not finding that record. Well, how can we overcome that? By talking and discovering that, yes, it truly didn't get, into the county records. So therefore we need to look other places, things like that. I think it's important that we make sure we understand what's going on there. All right, guys, so there are a couple other things that are happening in the genealogy world going on. Yes, Gretna Greens. We'll definitely be covering Gretna Greens next week in the masterclass, because yes, I love to research those Gretna Greens. Yeah, I know I can't type either. I have those typing issues as well. So a couple things happening. So guys, go ahead, and if you have not registered for Roots Tech, go ahead and do it. It's free. There's no reason not to register. Go ahead and register for it. It's coming up. I think we're about a month away now officially from Roots Tech. It's March 3rd through 5th. Definitely want to take part in that. They've got some fabulous keynote speakers. I'm super excited that they have Molly Ye coming from the Food Channel, who's actually does a lot of culinary heritage, which is just kind of a particular side interest of mine that my daughter and I like to explore. So that's a really exciting thing. So they've got fabulous speakers. They have lots of really great topics. I've been seeing other researchers who are out there who are going to be speaking. So I would definitely encourage you to do that, guys. And the wonderful thing is, even guys, if you can't see it, if you're not available to watch it from the 3rd through the 5th because you're working or whatever, then you will be able to access all those recordings after Roots Tech. So definitely I encourage you to sign up for that. I will be I have a talk there as well, but I'll be also doing some other fun things kind of from my home office, just to kind of enjoy the experience myself and help you guys navigate what's going on through Roots Tech. So we're going to have a lot of fun with that. Let's see what else is coming up over there. Yes, the only other thing I just wanted to kind of put in your ear is that I do have a new upcoming events page on my website. I'm still tweaking it just a wee bit, but anytime you're wondering, does Lisa have a Facebook Live today, or do I have an upcoming webinar or an upcoming masterclass? Anything that's coming on, am I doing a program with somebody else? I'm going to have it on that page, so you will know. It's kind of a one-stop place for you to go to see what's coming up, and what topics are being talked about which day. And so I would encourage you just to check it out. It's just, you'll find it right there in the top bar of the website over there. So yes, that's what I have for you guys today. I am going to head back into researching more marriage records because I'm just having so much fun with it. If you think you'd be interested in that masterclass, love for you guys to check it out. Just click the link in the comments, and we'll get you all signed up. So I look forward to seeing you guys next Thursday again here on the YouTube channel for another live chat next week. I'm trying to remember what I think next week Mary Eberly will be here to talk more about some DNA topics. So that's always exciting. I love to have her. I learned so much from her on DNA. All right, guys, back to your research. I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.